I'm not terribly concerned about where we are, but I do have concern about where we're going unless we undertake some significant steps to reduce the budget deficit.
Who are we going to depend on then? If we're increasing our corporate tax rate, that doesn't make us more competitive.
Why would we give
Because
companies like
many-
Amazon and Walmart, these major corporations, refundable credits to go spend money in the green energy sector?
Can you tell me the current level of our debt? What's the current debt amount? It's about 34 trillion.
Yeah,
Well, it'd be a significant increase in the debt.
a small increase in the debt.
Yeah, a significant increase in the debt.
Corporations don't pay taxes. The people that work for the corporations, the consumers of the products of those corporations, and the owners of those corporations pay the taxes.
Chinese entities will receive billions of American tax dollars every single year.
Are you aware that in 2021, FinCEN emailed financial institutions suggesting search terms including, and I quote, America First, quote, Trump, and MAGA to use an identifying transaction that may indicate, and I quote, involvement in riots or potential violence?
This is activity that took place under the previous administration, not under the Biden administration, in close proximity.
No, this is
right?
2021.
Isn't it true that nearly all middle-income individuals and families would pay more with the expiration of the Trump tax cuts?
Some individuals would.
In all four of President Biden's budgets, he plans to hit middle-class families with a multi-trillion-dollar tax increase starting in 2026. He has promised to let the Trump tax cuts expire. Isn't it true that President Biden is promising a $1,500 tax hike on a family of four earning less than $75,000 by that action?
The president has been very clear that no family earning less than $400,000 will face a tax hike. He's not proposed such a thing since he took office, and he's not proposing to allow that to happen when parts of TCJA expire.
Madam Secretary, implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act is really important. Let me give you a couple of minutes to talk about that.
Well, let me just start by saying that although there's still more work to do, we've made tremendous progress implementing it. We've completed more than 60 guidance projects, and these are all on critical and complex issues, and we've been focused on getting the issues right.
The IMF and their report a couple of days ago where they're very concerned about where we're at financially and where we're going.
Well, I would say I'm not terribly concerned about where we are, but I do have concern about where we're going unless we undertake some significant steps to reduce the budget deficit.
On a more even playing field. The fact that we are importing steel and aluminum and some other products that are made in a very dirty environment abroad. What do you think should be done about trying to see that American companies are competitive or not being subject to anti-competitive practices with this dirty production?
Well, President Biden proposed, I believe last week or the week before, to actually raise tariffs on Chinese steel. Our firms are cleaner, and China in steel suffers from tremendous overcapacity.
So is Treasury commit to work with Congress before signing the OECD Pillar 1 agreement?
We've been in touch with Congress throughout this process. One of the things we heard from Congress on Pillar 1 is that there needed to be an opportunity for public comment.
So in your view, what are some of the more responsible ways that we might offset the costs of any of the TCJA extensions?
Well, the president has proposed a very large number of raisers in his budget, and all of them could be used for this purpose.
Madam Secretary, could you discuss the importance of Social Security and why the president has adhered to making sure that we're not taxing people below $400,000?
Happy to. Every year, Social Security lifts tens of millions of seniors out of poverty. It is the federal government's most important anti-poverty program, and it's a guarantee that generations of Americans have counted on, namely after working hard throughout one's life, that you'll be able to retire with security and with dignity. And for those reasons, President Biden feels very strongly that we need to preserve the benefits and even extend the benefits of Social Security and honor the commitments that we have made to the nation's seniors.
Who are we going to depend on then? If we're increasing our corporate tax rate, that doesn't make us more competitive. And are we going to rely on our allies to reduce theirs? Is that the idea? I mean, this just makes no sense.
Well,
We've had no one leave.
I would point out that the Pillar 2 agreement does impose taxes on China that regardless of what their subsidies are or how they choose to tax, the United States and other countries that adopt Pillar 2 will have the ability to place taxes up to this minimum tax on China to try to level the playing field. So China will not gain any advantage if it chooses. It has said it will implement the deal. But if it doesn't do so, we will implement the deal on Chinese multinationals that compete with ours through a provision called the undertax payment rule.
Well, you had conversations with him. I would doubt that they said that they would cut their subsidies.
If a company owes the Treasury $200 million in taxes, and you would like to collect those taxes to help with deficit or spending, correct? But then they can turn around and write off all of that by buying green energy tax credits. How much of that money then of that $200 million is going to come into the Treasury? If I can wipe out my tax liability by buying green energy tax credits, what good does that do in coming into the Treasury?
Well, if the firm is using the transferability feature to buy these tax credits, then another company that we want to benefit from those credits, the stimulus and incentive that they offer, but that lacks sufficient tax liability. This is a way in which we provide.
But we're giving a pass to. I mean, analysis has shown that about 90% of these tax credits are going to go to companies with over $1 billion in revenue. And again, if you're looking to bring revenue into the Treasury to pay for whatever.
Look, it's really the same thing as essentially making the tax credits refundable, which would have been an alternative.
Why would we do that? Why would we give companies like Amazon and Walmart, these major corporations, refundable credits to go spend money in the green energy sector?
Because many of the companies that are responding to the IRA and building the clean energy economy we want to see are companies that lack sufficient tax liability to be able to benefit from these tax incentives.
Wait a minute. Madam Secretary, reclaiming my time, if you're going to go down that road and you're going to say companies lack they lack that tax liability. Why are we doing it on green energy and not looking at pharmaceuticals, not looking at other technology? But bottom line, why wouldn't we just say to Amazon, okay, not to pick on them, but they are a highly profitable company. Why not just say, you've got to pay your taxes, and then you go buy a fleet of battery-powered vans if you want to. You are cutting revenues. You're giving a tax break to the very people that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are saying have to go. They want them to pay their fair share, but they're not going to pay their fair share because they're going to go down this. They're going to go down this green energy deal that absolutely undermines our competitiveness. It doesn't make sense. The math doesn't add up. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I guess I'd like to ask you what you would call inflation now. What word would you use?
Well, inflation has come down considerably, and the consensus of thinking among economists is that it was largely due to supply shocks that are mitigating, and our inflation has been quite similar to that in other advanced countries around the world, which suggests it was due to supply shocks connected with the pandemic.
I think you'll have a difference of opinion in economists. I mean, we even had Democrat and Republican economists in 2021 talking about the extra spending that was coming proposed by the administration that was actually going to result in this inflation, and actually that's what we've seen. Well, I think most Americans would use phrases like crippling or painful or hindering the pursuit of the American dream. In fact, my constituents tell me about the challenges they face when they fill up their cars or buy their groceries or pay the rent or mortgage. And the numbers show the pain behind me that's still continuing to increase to this day.
Can you tell me the current level of our debt? What's the current debt amount? It's about 34 trillion, which includes debt held by the intergovernmental debt as well.
That's right.
And can you also tell me what the projected debt will be at the end of this budget period, at the end of 10 years?
So normally you look at debt held by the public.
Okay, we can use that number if you'd like.
Which is currently about 28 trillion.
Right.
And in 2034, under our budget, I believe it would be around 45 trillion.
Yeah.
But GDP also grows, and the ratio to GDP would be a few percentage points more than it is now.
It'd be at 128%, and now it's at 97. That's more than a few points.
No, it would be at 105% in 2034.
Debt held by the public, but it'll be a significant increase in...
It's now about 100%, so...
Yeah, now 97, it'll be about, it'd be increasing. So it'd be a significant increase in the debt.
A small increase in the debt.
Yeah, a significant increase in the debt.
We're not going to give away our tax dollars. In fact, it's said time and time again about how many tax dollars, the U.S. taxpayer dollars would go around the world, upwards of $200 billion. I know you said that was JCT's outward look, but I think it's important for everyone to know, and you know this to be certain. Corporations don't pay taxes. The people that work for the corporations, the consumers of the products of those corporations, and the owners of those corporations pay the taxes to increase pricing for whatever the commodities are. In fact, Forbes, Brookings, Tax Foundation, Cato, and many, many others have said that consumers pay 31% of the new taxes, workers pay 38% of the taxes. All of those people, for the most part, make less than $400,000 a year. So they're going, about 70% of the tax increase will be paid by people making less than $400,000 a year. Some portion of that. So I think it's disingenuous, as my colleague from Pennsylvania said, to say that no one is going to pay a single cent, as outlined in the White House's conversation about policy going forward. It's just disingenuous. It's not factual, and it's not honest with the American people. One other thing that you said is that the labor participation rate was better today than it was pre-COVID. I know you selectively picked an area.
For adults.
It was 63.3% on March 2020. Today it's 62.7. Overall workforce, when you don't have the luxury as an employer, as I did for 35 years, say, I'm only going to hire people working, you've got to be 25 years old or 54 years old.
We have an aging population, and as people retire, we know that labor force participation overall will decline over time.
Mr. Chair, you're back.
Fentanyl, you specifically talked about the money laundering that is involved. We know that Communist China is subsidizing the production of these fentanyl analogs that are now illegal in the United States and in China, but yet they are exporting it, killing, as you know, 100,000 Americans annually. A lot of it is going through the drug cartels in Mexico, in particular when they're subsidizing the production of this fentanyl in China. NPP and ANPP are two fentanyl precursors that we know specifically the Mexican drug cartels are using. So according to the Congressional Research Service, U.S.-destined illicit fentanyl appears to be produced clandestinely in Mexico using these chemical precursors from China. Earlier this month, you reported on your trip that you were creating a joint Treasury People's Bank of China cooperation and exchange on money laundering. So just wanted to know where this group is at, what you think we'll be able to derive from this to help save these American lives that are being lost, sadly, because of this interaction between the CCP and the Mexican drug cartels.
So I think fentanyl is a critical issue, as you've indicated, and Treasury is doing everything that we can to stem the flow of precursors from China to Mexico and the illegal sale of fentanyl from Mexico into the United States. I've also visited Mexico to discuss the fentanyl issue and to enhance our cooperation with them. In the case of China, President Biden and President Xi, when they met, I guess it was in November, in Woodside, agreed to jointly tackle fentanyl, which was a very good development. Meetings have been taking place, as you noted, in my recent trip, I guess it was 2 weeks ago to China. We agreed to establish a special work, sort of dialogue or work plan around illicit finance.
Notice also that that the president's budget provides a new mortgage relief credit. Can you talk a little bit about what that one is?
Well, homeownership for people who don't already own homes, first-time buyers, is almost prohibitively expensive. First of all, mortgage rates have been so low for so long that it's created a kind of lock-in across much of the country where people don't want to sell their homes to buy new ones because they'll lose the benefit of the low mortgage rates they've locked in. And then with house prices having gone up, and now with much higher interest in mortgage rates, it's almost impossible for first-time buyers. So the president has proposed a pair of tax credits. One would go $10,000, I believe, to purchases of new homes, and the other would go to individuals who are willing to sell their homes to try to get rid of some of that lock-in. But we know that affordable housing, and especially starter homes, is an area where we really need to do a lot to increase availability.
The current agreements establish a dangerous precedent that will take the U.S. decades to reverse by creating a future where our automotive and other industries are heavily reliant on foreign technologies. Without immediate passage of both of my bills, Chinese entities will receive billions of American tax dollars every single year. Secretary Yellen, yes or no? Does the Biden administration support taxpayer dollars funding Chinese entities?
Well, when it comes to electric vehicles, the IRA, which obviously the administration supports, has foreign entity of concern restrictions coming into effect this year and next, which will severely curtail, almost prevent entirely participation of Chinese firms in producing components or minerals or processing
That's not
that
yes or
go
no.
into batteries.
That's
So that's a very significant restriction that will protect our supply chain. With respect to 45X, that's a credit that Congress directed to go to any company that undertakes certain advanced manufacturing
Reclaiming
in
my
the
time.
United
So I'm curious what Treasury's plan is to ensure that the final domestic content guidance for solar facilities incentivizes onshoring of the full U.S. solar supply chain and reduces our dependence on China for components like, for example, polysilicon or wafer. Could you comment on that?
Sure. Well, we put out some initial guidance on domestic content. It was an interagency effort, and we relied heavily on advice from the Department of Transportation in applying the Buy America rules that are referenced in the text of the IRA in determining the categorization of clean energy products. We also consulted with the Department of Energy.
Under the Biden Secrecy Act, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, an agency under your control at the Department of Treasury, receives vast amounts of data covering millions of financial transactions involving everyday Americans. Is that correct?
Through FinCEN receives reports.
And is it correct that FinCEN received 20.6 million currency transaction reports in 2022?
I'm not sure, it could be.
Could be roughly more or less,
I don't know the number.
but you would agree that it's millions of reports.
Probably, yes.
It's also true that FinCEN received 4.3 million suspicious activity reports in 2022, which was nearly double the amount received by the agency in 2029.
I don't know.
You don't know at all, even though
I
it's an
don't know
agency
if they received double the previous year. I really don't know.
So would you, but SARS typically gets millions of reports? You would agree with that
Yeah, I
statement?
don't know if it doubled, though.
Okay, well, I'm sure your staff can provide you with that information.
I'm
It's
sure
an
they can.
Agency under your, so you don't know, is what you're telling me?
I could look into it, but I don't happen to know.
Okay, doesn't the data in these reports include important and sensitive private financial data?
Well, these are private data only available to law enforcement.
But it includes data of American citizens, their private financial data, correct?
Well, on transactions that are regarded as suspicious
And their data,
and
correct.
potentially illegal.
The sensitive personal financial data included in this report is held in a database, correct?
Yes.
Neither FinCEN nor any federal law enforcement agencies needs to get a warrant to access this private financial data. Is that correct?
I don't think you need to get a warrant, but it's only shared subject to strict confidentiality,
But you don't need to get a warrant.
not to the best of my knowledge.
Are you aware that in 2021, FinCEN emailed financial institutions suggesting search terms including, and I quote, America First, quote, Trump, and MAGA to use in identifying transactions that may indicate, and I quote, involvement in riots or potential violence?
This is activity that took place under the previous administration, not under the Biden administration, in close proximity.
No, this is
right-
2021.
This is
2021.
This is before the President Biden's inauguration.
No, it's after.
And after January 6th. And there was concern about potential disruption of his inaugural. And FinCEN worked as it's instructed to do with financial institutions to try to uncover who was involved in January 6th.
So are you aware of the FinCEN emailing the financial institutions with those search terms?
I am now aware that there were communications that took place. In some cases, I believe financial institutions suggested to this group search terms they had used that had been helpful in identifying potential perpetrators of January 6th.
FinCEN also worked with the FBI in early 2021 to determine certain transaction thresholds for SARs. These include certain weapons-related transactions. Do you know how many SARs were filed as a result of the FBI and FinCEN's coordination at that time?
No, the only reason that I believe that weapons were involved, it's never a search term used on its own that results in anything. It's a way of trying to narrow the scope of search for individuals who, based on other information available to the financial institution, may have been guilty of illegal behavior.
Without a warrant.
If the Trump tax cuts expire and President Biden fails to pass his tax plan, which actually currently doesn't exist, which Americans will pay less in taxes?
President Biden has made absolutely clear that he opposes increasing taxes on people earning less than $400,000, and he supports cutting taxes for working people and families with children to give them more breathing room. And
Reclaiming my time.
he will
Reclaiming my
work
time.
with Congress to try to achieve that.
Ma'am, reclaiming my time. Thank you. Isn't it true that nearly all middle-income individuals and families would pay more with the expiration of the Trump tax cuts?
Some individuals would, but President Biden has said he would oppose allowing tax cuts to expire for people making under $400,000.
But my understanding, though, is that he doesn't really have a tax plan. He just has ideas. And so how are you going to translate that into what?
There will be a negotiation over what to do when these tax cuts expire. And the president, as he does in many other situations, will negotiate with Congress.
But I think that if you let these expire, you are going to see increases. You are going to see increases. And without an alternative, I mean, we just, right now, what you're saying is there's just an idea out there.
There are
Right now,
principles.
there are principles, okay, principles, same thing, there's no real plan, and you're gonna let, he's gonna let these tax cuts that people are recognizing that they are seeing right now expire with just principles that
There
are
will be a
hanging out there.
negotiation, and in that negotiation, he will oppose any tax increases on families earning under $400,000 at the same time that he will oppose keeping in place benefits that went to the wealthy.
And maybe you addressed this earlier, but is he going to tell us what these principles are? Is he going to give us some
He's
concrete?
told you what the principles are.
Okay.
I'm telling
All
you
right.
what the
Well,
principles
then
are.
there's just not, I mean, we're supposed to rely on these ideas, principles, whatever you want to call them, when we have solid tax cuts right here, and they shouldn't be allowed to expire.
Is according to the Tax Foundation, the top combined marginal rate on corporate income under current law is actually 25.6%, and the president's proposal would increase that to 32.2%, a corporate tax rate that would be the second highest in the OECD behind Colombia. The Joint Committee on Tax has shown that most of the cost of a 28% corporate tax rate would be borne by Americans making less than $500,000. What specific analysis can you point to demonstrating that raising the corporate tax rate won't impose burdens on low and middle income Americans?
Well, I think all of the analysis I'm familiar with shows that TCJA, including the corporate tax cut, was a regressive tax cut that disproportionately benefited the wealthy and large corporations. And the corporate tax cut enriched corporate shareholders at the expense of the alternative, which would have been benefits to middle-class families.
So if I could jump
It
in.
promised an investment boom, and that certainly never materialized. You said that the economy did well, but I don't believe it did well because of that piece of legislation.
Okay,
And
thank you,
it simply
and I'll reclaim
busted the
I'll reclaim my
deficit.
time. I don't believe you can argue, and if you want to come to the Utah's first district, you can hear from companies in that district where their real wage income grew for their frontline employees. This wasn't just for all of the shareholders like it's oftentimes communicated.
So if I heard right, that you assumed earlier that China will join the OECD agreement, what assurances do you have that they would truly comply with the rules and not continue to abusing the system like they have done so many times on the international level? And why should we give the CCP on economic advantages on the back of American taxpayers?
Okay, well, you covered a lot of different things, but let me respond on China and Pillar 2. You know, this is an agreement that contains an enforcement mechanism. That's one of the reasons it's so powerful. If a country doesn't go along with it, doesn't raise their minimum tax rate on their multinationals to the agreed upon level, other countries that have complied and put it into effect can tax firms based in countries that are not going along with it. That applies to China. If China doesn't raise taxes on its multinationals and they operate in the United States, the U.S. will impose taxes by, it's called the undertaxed payment rule. We will impose taxes on those Chinese corporations, and we'll collect the tax revenue, and we will make sure that those companies do pay a 15% minimum tax so that they don't have unfair competition with our companies. Now, if China imposes the tax, they can collect the tax revenue. But if they won't do it, we're going to collect the tax revenue, and we're going to tax the Chinese firms. And this works to our advantage, not to China's.
I'm not really sure that, you know, China's been always like, you know, for them, that stealing is much cheaper than, you know, researching, and it just takes longer time. It's much faster.
So, Madam Secretary, just lastly, can you please speak as to why the Treasury decided to define battery components this way? And can you explain what your department is doing to help U.S. manufacturers and not Chinese manufacturers?
I mean, I'd be glad to get back to you and try to understand better what you're focusing on here, but the FIAC rules are very strong and indicate that battery components starting this year made by a foreign entity of concern can't be included in any car that receives the $7,500 credit. Next year, that expands to critical minerals and their processing.
During your Senate Finance hearing, you said traditional energy companies have had significant tax benefits that tilted the scales. And the Treasury Green Book, the administration's tax proposal says, quote, these traditional oil, gas, and coal preferences encourage more investment in the fossil fuel section that would occur in a neutral system, and this market distortion is detrimental to long-term energy security. Do you really believe that oil and natural gas production is detrimental to the long-term energy security?
Well, to give preferences right now, when we
Aren't you doing that
understand
with 3 new policy deals, giving preferences, picking winners and losers?
Well, we pick winners and losers, but they have to be ones that are positive for what is an existential threat,
Okay,
which is
so you
climate
believe
change.
then that oil and gas, natural production, is an existential threat, and that will is somehow better to cut all of that production for our long-term energy security.
No one is saying to cut all that production,
So
but
some is a-
there's no we will
I
be
reclaim my
dependent on this for
administration's
a
goal
long
to
time,
shut
but there's
down-
no
Is it the
reason.
administration's goal to shut down energy companies and change the rules to basically make it impossible to operate profitably?
It is not That is not the administration's objective, but there's no reason why we should be giving tax preferences
But is tilting the
to
scales
incent.
toward green energy worth the security risk by buying oil from adversaries such as Venezuela?
We're promoting clean energy and renewables.
We are buying it from countries.
In order
We are
to
buying it from countries that produce it in a much dirtier manner than any place in the U.S. And
We're
that is
going
what
to
your
switch to
policies are
renewables.
forcing us to do right now.
Madam Secretary, thank you for your time here before the committee, and thank you for extending your time. We stand adjourned. Without objection.
Members will have 2 weeks.
Members will have 2 weeks to submit questions in writing. Madam Secretary, thank you.